I think before we start the panel discussion proper, let's set a little bit of the context. And I could begin by saying that it's a human trait to characterize the challenge of the moment as being unprecedented in terms of its complexity and scale. And that's certainly something that's being said about shipping today. And I ask myself, is that really true? Is this moment so very different from the moments all that have led through history up to now? And I think that the answer to that is a resounding yes. And it has really has its basis in the impact of sustainability and the changing impact of sustainability on the business. So with three quick examples just to lay out why I think that is. First, let's look at the impact of environmental regulation. Years and years ago, that was almost a contradiction in terms. We were dealing with really fairly small issues compared to what they have become today. Today, we are just a little over a year and a half from a change which is going to bring a level of cost through compliance that is completely unprecedented. And I think what that will mean is that for a lot of carriers, that managing the topic isn't just about technical and operational issues. It's a commercial matter too, to protect margins. I don't think much of the industry enjoyed the margins to absorb those costs. Next, consider what that regulation will mean in terms of what powers the industry. Most of the world's fleet are going to change fuel. You could hardly come up with something much more fundamental in nature than changing the lifeblood of the industry. And then thirdly, as we've already heard this morning, there are regulatory deliberations that are soon going to really get underway in earnest that may change the nature of the service that the customer offer, or that the industry offers to its customers. So in total, there is a lot of impact becoming because due to sustainability. And I think that you could say managing sustainability, it's not a matter of life or death for the industry. It's much more important than that. So if I could begin then with my first question, there's so much of this has to do with innovation. And there's an apparent contradiction that I keep coming across. And that is that since I've been in this industry, I've heard that it's very conservative, it's resistant to change. But then on the other hand, why are we all here at the Green Shipping Technology and Shipping2030 conference? So could I turn to you, Lars Robert, to give your views on innovation. Do we have an innovation issue in the industry?
Thank you, Roger. Is it on? No.
Now it's on. Thank you. Just need a little help with this innovation here. Thank you, Roger, and good morning to all. It's a great pleasure to be in the panel today and discuss these very important issues for the industry. Innovation. I think we have a challenge in the industry in the sense that we need to find ways, like by the way the rest of the world do, find ways to do things different in the future. We have to move away from very, very vast amounts of coal and oil into something which contains a lot less carbon and fuel-wise, what is that? Well, the obvious answer there is hydrogen, because there's a lot of that. But there are probably other ways to get there, but we need innovation to move us away from what we have been doing traditionally. And that will take time, and that will be something that we cannot leave to individual ship owners to figure out. We need a concerted, substantial and sustained innovation effort to be framed some way internationally, and we have proposed, along with some of our industry colleagues, to do this via some IMO scheme. That is to be seen whether that will happen, but obviously, and as I said, the innovation effort will not happen in the shipping industry in isolation. We will hopefully, with the world, innovate and be able to use some of the solutions that will help also bring down the 97% of the emissions in the rest of society, which also needs to be dealt with. So in a way, I'm optimist. I have to be optimist because if we're not optimistic about this, then we kind of know what the result will be, and that's not a pretty picture.
And thank you. And you talk about tapping into innovation and achieving a new level of scale in a concerted, substantial and sustained effort with innovation. Diane, you're working with an innovation cluster, closely dealing with renewable energy in particular. Is there expertise that can be brought to bear from outside of the industry that would help, and how does that happen?
Oh, thank you. Hello. Yeah, can you hear me? So I think thank you very much, everybody, for being here, and thank you, Sita, for organising the event, and Roger for moderating it. I just wanted to point to the idea of it being a conservative industry. I'm relatively new to the shipping industry, and every industry that I have worked in, and I've worked in several over my long career, has very similar challenges. And I think by using the term conservative, what we do is start a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think what we are looking at with renewable energy being introduced into the shipping industry has been done outside of shipping. It's been done in the energy generation sector with great success, and I think there's lots of capability, lots of knowledge, lots of technology experience, if not the actual technology, that we can transfer from those other sectors to help decarbonize shipping. So I think that to go to Tamara's point earlier, we look to collaborate across the shipping industry, but also to collaborate outside of shipping and find areas where there's experience and knowledge that we can call upon to effect a transformational shift. I think energy efficiency is not enough for the task that we have ahead of us, but I think we can achieve a transformational shift through collaboration and through building new relationships. So I don't think the challenge is insurmountable, but I do think it's enormous. But I think that we have the potential to get there through collaborating in different diverse networks.
Thank you. Carleen, if I could turn to you now, on the question of transformation. As was nicely put in Tamara's presentation, it's not just a question of technology, is it? It's also, there's a huge cultural dimension. And you're working in bringing together different industry stakeholders together. How do you see that cultural shift happening? What will enable it? What are the obstacles also to look out for?
Well, thank you for the question, Roger. And I also want to thank Mr. Tilgaard for his presentation. And he said that shipping has been around for hundreds of years. It's actually hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years that shipping has been delivering a service to global society. But that delivery of service has been mandated, not mandated, but we have been working under a social license to operate. And as much as we like to say that that global society needs us, and they do, to transport 90% of the world's goods. But if we don't change the way that we are operating, then global society will remove our social license to operate and impose upon us how we operate. So if we don't make those changes ourselves, those changes will be made under us, onto us. You know, and we're at a propitious time to make those changes. We are hopefully emerging from the longest shipping recession since 1845. I used to say since we began thousands of years ago, but Martin Stopford says it's 1845, and I wouldn't disagree with him. I wasn't around then. And we dodged a bullet in COP21. We were, along with aviation, we were not included in that convention. We were given the opportunity to demonstrate that we can self-regulate and that we can, as a global industry, reduce our emission structure and take responsibility for how we operate. And I firmly believe that the IMO is the regulatory body to do it. We need that global framework. Yes, my accent indicates I'm from the United States, but I do believe in global frameworks. Absolutely. But we can't afford to continue slow steaming in terms of our regulatory changes and our implementation. We need to accelerate change in our industry. We need to accelerate our operations. We need to accelerate our strategies for reducing our global impacts from our emissions. We are all global citizens. We all want this for society. But we have to take that responsibility and solutions. And we have to sell our industry. We have to sell shipping. On the one hand, we complain that the only time people think about us is when there's oil in the water and dead birds. On the other hand, we complain they don't think about us at all. So how do we sell our industry as being globally responsible while delivering an excellent service? Because that's what we are doing, is delivering an excellent service. How do we take responsibility for this so that we can be the ones that determine how we operate rather than have others do that for us?
Thank you very much, Carleen. Svein, David, if I could go to you next. One area I think that where the acceleration of change is not a big challenge is in digitalisation. This is happening very, very fast. What role do you think it can play in making the industry more sustainable?
Well, thank you, Roger, for handing me that question. Actually, I don't think it's an easy. The digitalization happens very fast, but still we have the challenge to on board ships. There is a lot of things that need to be approved. We have a type approval regime on board. So even though the technology is available in IMO, it's for conventional ships, it is not allowed to use all the new technology which will come. The IMO has taken a new approach, which we call the goal-based, using the goal-based standard, which will benefit for the new technology to develop as well. But there's a lot of things. I was listening to all you, the other speakers here now, so and the speaker which has been on the speak before today, and they have elements of how we can reach new goals, environmental goals. But at the end of the day, it has to be beneficial for those who sails the vessels. And it's actually quite complex when you have flag states, which have the largest flag states have customers which want something back for having they sailing their flag. So they have to talk their case in IMO actually. So there can be contributions in the IMO debate as well when we are making new approaches to international legislation regimes. But coming back to what you were asking of the benefits, which we can see, I see the interaction between efficiency, fuel consumption, Internet of Things. Everything need to be connected, kind of. Can you repeat your question? Because I fell a little bit off there in the introduction.
So the question is that digitalization is a technology which is very much in focus now.
Yes.
But is it answering a need for in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. The thing we see in the digitalization today, it's not driven by the ship owners. It's more like the makers and those things, and availability. I can see the benefit of the digitalization as today. We need smarter way to operate. And of course, when it comes to reducing emission and compared to digitalization, we can use the digitalization to be more efficient. We can make it smarter. In Norway, we had a ferry company which had taken a research of their captains sailing the vessel, and I think it was almost 50% different in consumption from one captain to the other. And if you can do this automated up to integrated, it will.
So it takes the sort of the behavioral variable out of the equation then.
Yeah.
George, may I turn to you now? You are with one of the companies who are arguably one of the biggest shippers in the world. And is digitalization something that's become common within your organization? What's your thinking on that? How will you apply the potential of digitalization?
Yeah, I would say, like with everybody else, digitalization is becoming a topic that's discussed a lot more than it used to be. I mean, I've been at Cargill a long time now, and it's only in the last year or so, it's every meeting, every discussion, there's some talk of digitalization, blockchain, all the new technologies that could come to shipping, probably should come to shipping. Everyone's looking for the next disruptor that could totally change the way we do things today. So yes, it's a very big topic within Cargill and certainly within ocean transportation. I think on a more practical level, I agree with the previous speaker, digitalization can definitely be used to improve the efficiency of the way we run our ships. We're testing weather routing devices, sort of devices that help you maximize the efficiency of the ship you're using through routing, through engine tuning, etc. So all those things, I think, can definitely play a role in helping reduce emissions and making shipping more sustainable. But on the other side, I think digitalization, outside the pure sustainability, I think the efficiency of shipping can be greatly improved through, for example, the just simple things like electronic bills of lading, just reducing the paper trail that's currently within shipping, and that would help us make it more efficient, and then we'd be able to concentrate on some of the more important things.
You know, one of the things that we don't talk enough about is net environmental impact. I mean, obviously digitalization is bringing efficiencies to our operations, but some of the other strategies that are coming forward, we're not always looking at the net environmental impact to see if it is truly beneficial. I think digitalization is a good example of where, per force, your net environmental impact is positive. I also wouldn't recommend anybody try to take a thumb drive to Cargill. It doesn't work.
Thank you, Carleen. I'd like to draw now on some of the questions which you've been asking. And Lars Robert, one of those questions was, what role do you see for automated production, robotics, and local production in terms of reducing the environmental footprint of the industry? Where is the tipping point, in your view?
I was actually... Now it's not on again. Now it's on. I was just actually preparing for that question, and because it's a really interesting question, because it deals with the projections of demand for seaborne trade into the future. And actually, this brings me back to the keynote that Jesper Teilgaard made earlier, and I would certainly like to comment on a few of the aspects that he touched on. One of them being the Paris Agreement and the need for shipping to contribute, now that we are not specifically and explicitly mentioned in the Paris Agreement. But some of the principles there obviously applies, and they applies across the board. and the goals are also something that we need to deal with in this industry. The first goal in the Paris Agreement is that everyone have to peak their emissions as soon as possible. And hey, the good news is we did that in 2008. I think that's a shocking news for most people, maybe not in this room, but at least outside the room, that we actually did peak in 2008. Since 2008, emissions from shipping have gone down. We are at the moment some more than 10% below that level. If you then look at the predictions for seaborne trade into the future and couple that with the expected efficiency gains we can see that will come in due to larger shipping, due to efficiency gains in fuels that we know will come in over time, we can see the net emissions are about to stay at the same level. But these projections, they build on estimations on GDP all the way into 2050. And quite frankly, those GDP growth scenarios, they were developed in the good days of 2004-05. And they are up here. And by the way, everybody is about a few percentage points per year below that. So if we take out the GDP-driven demand growth, then it's more than likely that the emissions will continue to go down from now all the way to 2050 in the scenarios that are consistent with the world doing what Paris tells the world to do. And this is another area where I can make a comment to what was said in the keynote. Yes, there are predictions out there that were made in the third greenhouse gas study that we might grow our emissions 250%. But that's a scenario where the world did not agree on anything in Paris. That's a world where we continue to grow our economies like maniacs, I would say. We would continue to stay on coal and oil big time. And by the way, in that scenario, we would still only be 3.3% by 2050. But the temperature would certainly be a lot more than 2 degrees higher than the average pre-industrial level by 2100. Probably more than 5 degrees. So is it relevant to discuss shipping's emissions in a scenario where all the ice in the world have melted? Probably not. We should discuss the emissions of shipping in scenarios where the world actually do what everyone agreed in Paris. And that is where the good news comes in, because in these scenarios, it very much looks like we are on a trajectory going down. We are not decarbonizing according to this trajectory yet. And that is where we need to do a lot. So now, what is not built into these predictions and these models is the effect of circular economies, of automation, of production moving closer to consumption, which seems very much reasonably to be trends that will accelerate into the future and will largely, at least for the finished goods, change the demand projections in a downward trend. If demand go down, emissions go down. So yes, there is a positive effect from this. Still, to reach decarbonization, we need to do a lot, because emitting no carbon, that's a challenge for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars Robert. Okay, I'd like to take another question from plenary, and that is, what are the steps between a few percent improvement and zero emissions shipping, seen in the futuristic slides as presented by Tamara? Now, clearly that's not something, there are steps in between. So, Carleen, if I could start with you, and then Diane, I could go to you then afterwards with that.
Well, I think we are starting to see some steps, and I think we're going to have presentations throughout the day that indicate that. And I mean, one of the steps is, the requirement by 2020 of the low sulfur cap, going from 3.5 to 0.5, and the various strategies that are being deployed to do that, ranging scrubbers being one, using the 3.5, and LNG being another strategy. I would submit that both of those are bridging strategies. And then the challenge with that, and then there are others, hydrogen, et cetera. And also, something that hasn't been mentioned is nuclear. Lockheed Martin right now is looking at compact fusion, cold fusion, nuclear opportunities for engines, which could have applications in this industry. So we need to look at the range of options. Right now, I think we focus a lot on scrubbers and LNG as bridging solutions. As ship owners, though, if you're looking at a 25-year-old asset, I think there is a challenge to determine, what do I order today in order to meet the goals of 25 years down the road? So I don't envy you your job at all, Roger. But I do think it's an exciting opportunity for us to explore other technologies, to explore the circular economy, which was discussed earlier, to explore the greening of our industry. But it has to also be practicable. And we can't lose sight of the fact that some of the items that are being mentioned just aren't practicable for an industry that needs to get from point A to point B, and oftentimes that's thousands of miles, on a timed schedule, with a cargo that has an expected delivery. You've got contractual requirements to meet. And some of the solutions that I've heard so far don't provide that ability to guarantee you can meet those contractual obligations. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and a lot more work that needs to be done.
Thank you.
Roger, I'd love your job, because it would be the most exciting playground in the world as far as I'm concerned. The huge nature of the challenge gives us a great opportunity to do some really exciting things and to think right outside the box, think as if there isn't even a box. So one of the things that we do as human beings is kind of figure out how we can change from the paradigm in which we exist. And I think we have to think right across the system. So one of the challenges that I have when I talk about wind technology and wind propulsion is everybody says, oh, you'll never get there because you won't be on time. The point is that wind works, renewable energy works to generate energy, and it has done for thousands and thousands of years, and it has some attributes which are worth factoring into economic models. It's free. It's abundantly available, and it's exclusively available to the asset that's equipped to harness it. So if we start to think about what impact that has on our overall business model, and we start to combine those, what I call primary renewable energies, those are the ones that come directly from the sun, the wind, and the waves, and we combine that with secondary renewable energies like hydrogen or ammonia, so that you can have a 100% renewable hybrid solution that will meet just-in-time targets, will meet normal operational speeds, you start to get something really, really interesting to play with. And then if you start to think about how you build the things how you build the circular economy, how you build new tonnage in the circular economy, it's not an easy process, but it's tremendously entertaining to reach out from the shipbuilder through the cargo owners to the ship breakers to understand every single aspect of the system and to appreciate that there are different value metrics that we may be overlooking. So, for instance, the embedded materials in a large asset, what value will they have at the end of the ship's life? So if you combine the renewable energy and you look at circular economy design systems, then you start to be thinking about regenerative solutions. Whether we will ever get to zero emission is an interesting question. I think we could get very easily to 100% renewable in a certain ship type. We're not suggesting that there's a one-size-fits-all. That's one of the interesting things. There isn't a silver bullet. But I think what we can do is to start making really big changes. And interestingly for me, I was at a conference or a workshop last week where the subject of hydrogen and ammonia was being discussed, and whether it would be cost effective to be used in shipping. And it all predicated on the need for zero emission electricity to be generated. So my question is, if we can generate zero emission electricity, zero cost electricity, forgive me, on land, What's to stop us doing it in the shipping industry? One last point. I set out working in the renewable energy industry in about 1995. The first wind turbine that went up was 45 kilowatts. Now we're building fleets of 9 megawatt turbines offshore. And that's been done by the demonstration of the possible at the outset, and then through collaboration and visionary thinking and good working together. So I think it's a huge challenge. So if ever you want to give up.
Thank you very much, Diane. I wasn't expecting my job to be a topic of discussion here this morning, but I will say this, that one of the most enjoyable and challenging aspects of it is how to get commercial traction from the environmental profile that our company has. But I would like to turn the same question to you, George, and asking if you can answer that in the frame, in the context of the fact that a lot of shipping lines are working on very small margins, and is there really any room to make the investment to drive the agenda forward?
It's a very good question and a very important point. As Carleen said, we're coming out of a very prolonged recession in shipping across all, from containers to tankers to dry bulk. And nobody's performed well over the last few years. Cash is tight, financing's tight, margins are low. If you look at where the forward price of dry bulk freight is, it barely breaks even for an owner ordering a standard ship today, let alone one with additional capex. So I think one of the main challenges is the lack of finance and the lack of cash to invest in new solutions. I think the cost of freight is probably too low to incentivize investment. And I also think if you look at we did some work looking at alternative fuels, whether it's biofuels or LNG, and the payback periods that you need are long, given where the alternative is today. So one of the things that was mentioned, one of the questions earlier that we would think is an important part of the debate is the pricing of carbon. Is carbon priced correctly today? It's not incentivizing any changes at the moment. So I think that's one of the things we think should be investigated further.
You know, one of the phrases that Diane used was tremendously entertaining. At the end of the day, we have to recognize that we're operating a business, and we have to find that balance between commerce and conservation.
Yeah, I'm not expecting us to just go out and have fun. But I think the purpose one of the conversations we were having earlier today is that we want to effect systems change, we want to effect cultural change. And I think having exciting, challenging tasks is a really entertaining thing to do. And so it improves the quality of your life. You want to go to work, you want to have more excitement and achievement in your world. I used to have the pleasure of working in Formula One, and I think what we need to be thinking about is that kind of Formula One mindset. We didn't dodge a bullet at Paris. The climate doesn't understand policy. The climate disruption is coming at us whether we want it or not. And we have an opportunity to take part in the greatest race that humankind has ever been in. So for me, I think that is really a very challenging, very exciting opportunity. And so I would certainly say that it's inspiring to be facing these challenges at the moment. And I just wanted to make a point about the finance aspect. We're working in the renewable area and working with risk assessors, and there's a really important balance to be drawn between the extra capex and the reduction in the opex by using renewables. And then you can start to flip business models and create new ways of doing business. So I think we just have to keep moving out and asking questions. It's a sense of being in a place of good inquiry.
Thank you. And if I could just pick up on one point that you mentioned, you talk about an opportunity And I think that's an interesting way to look at this, rather than taking the traditional view that to do better for the environment, it means it's going to hurt us economically. And I think that, Svein David, the kind of the technology that you're working with does create that double win kind of scenario. This the holy grail of sustainability solutions is those which make sense both environmentally and they have an implicit economic driver. Do we have other tools at our disposal that tick both of those criteria, Lars Robert?
Me?
Lars Robert.
Oh, that's good.
Sorry, I was just
Reading the last one down there, because that was a very interesting question. Could you please repeat the last bit of your question?
Do you think that we have solutions that we will even have solutions which make both sense both from an environmental and an economic perspective? And if we don't have them yet, how can we find them?
Solutions are only solutions if they make sense. I mean, I think that's quite clear. So snake oil solutions out there that can save the world will not save the world. We need to find those that make economic sense, and those will prevail because economic sense is what drives this business. So I'm actually quite confident that we will get the right solutions, and when we get the right solutions, they will also be implemented. Because it is a very tight margin industry, and anything that can improve your margins, and these solutions, they will improve your margins because they will take cost out on your fuel bill. So it will be a self-fulfilling thing when we find the right solutions. I'm very confident about that.
Okay, so if we look at the how do we avoid that situation where the response to environmental challenges is very slow and more talk than action? Carleen, have you thoughts around that?
Well, I firmly believe, and I agree with Lars Robert, that it has to be a practical solution. It has to make commercial sense as well as environmental sense. And I guess I infer from your response that we're not there yet. I used this statement that scrubbers and LNG are bridging solutions. And we've got 21 months to achieve compliance by 2020. And I think the industry was in the back of their mind thinking, you know, IMO's going to not really go through with this 2020 requirement. And that question mark has been erased completely. So we've got 21 months to sort out what we're going to do in order to achieve compliance by 2020. And then right behind it is the GHG reductions, the roadmap for the strategy for 2023. And I think a lot of the suggestions that are coming forward are trying to address all of these. But to Lars Roberts' point, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we've found that combination that will get us to where we need to go. But it is a step-by-step process. And the challenge for ship owners is, how do I order a ship today that will be compliant 5, 10, 25 years down the road?
Thank you very much. And time is now running down on us, so I might try to just recap on some of the very interesting points that have been made here on the discussion so far. There was a call for a concerted, substantial and sustained effort on innovation. And I think I certainly agree with that point of view. I think that what has got us to this point as an industry is not going to take us to where we need to go. I think it's also incredibly important for the industry to take the initiative This is either the industry do it for themselves or we have it done unto us, and perhaps on terms that we don't much like. So taking the initiative, looking for the opportunities, and seeking those win-win environmental economic solutions. A single global regulatory framework was mentioned as an important factor, and I think for a global industry, there's an awful lot of sense to that. When we are talking about regulations, another point made here was that it's important to think in terms of what the industry has already committed to in terms of reduction, not the business as usual model where we end up massively with a massively greater proportion of emissions. And the last point to briefly talk about is to think about not just primary renewable energy sources in isolation, but in combination with secondary renewable energy, because I think that the point is that would increase the applicability of these technologies to a much greater degree. I'd like to thank you all for a very stimulating and interesting discussion, and I look forward to hearing more ideas like this as the day unfolds. Thank you very much.